Hi, Janet Perez here with the Painted Saguaro, and I'm here today with Paint Couture to show you how I created a beautiful French country piece on this little Bombay that I picked up at a local auction. I'm starting off with some of the Paint Couture color Truffle and some Saltwash and mixing it to be about the consistency of brownie batter. You want to make sure that you get it blended really well so you don't get any little white chunks in there. And you can either use this product or you can use the embossing medium, which is another great way to add texture to a piece. And that is available through Paint Couture. Anyway, I wanted to get some texture on this piece. The truffle color isn't really going to be showing, but for me, it's important to lay down a base coat. For darker pieces like this one is going to be, I like to use a darker base coat, and this truffle is perfect for that. On lighter pigmented colors, yellows, pinks, things along that line, even whites and creams, I'm going to start with a light color base coat because I want that color to come through true on my piece of furniture. And I just feel that putting down a base coat of another paint color underneath it really helps, especially if you're going to be blending on a piece like I plan on doing with this one. You don't have to blend and then re-blend over it because you're going to get much better coverage laying paint over paint. So you don't need to worry about having holidays or missed spots on your piece when you're blending. It helps a lot, trust me. So I'm almost done with the front of this, and then I'm going to turn it and work on the side of it, and then we're going to move on to the next step. So here I am finishing up the side of this piece. The other side has been painted already. I'm kind of touching up areas where I might have little holidays. And as you can see, I had exactly enough paint to finish this piece. As you get more experienced, you learn about how much paint you need to do a step like this so that when you're mixing paint with texture or mixing colors to blend for a certain piece, you're not over or underestimating how much you need. I've got the piece laying on its back right now because I want to make sure that I get into all of those little areas that I can't see from the top or from bird's eye level. And because I'm partially handicapped and I can't get down on the floor, laying it on its back is the easiest way for me to get in and make sure that I didn't miss any spots when I'm painting a piece. Because you guys, there's nothing worse than, and this happened to me early in my painting career, but there's nothing worse than having a piece get picked up by a customer or a shipper, a transporter, and realizing that you missed the back leg on a piece or have a big spot that you didn't get painted. It's pretty embarrassing. So this is just a way to avoid that kind of embarrassment. So now I'm starting off with my second layer, and I'm using Deep Sea, Dark Lake, and Eggplant. And I think that they're a really beautiful color combination together. I'm going to use the Dark Sea for the outer edges of the piece. I'm going to pull the Deep Lake into the center of the piece. And I'm going to use that Eggplant, as you can see here, to sort of go over the carved details and just add some depth and dimension to those areas. Working around the outside edge, pulling that Eggplant in, and I'm really loving how this is looking. And this paint just goes on so smoothly and so nicely. It's incredible when you're working with good quality paint, what a difference it makes. So again, working around the outside edge, I spritz some water occasionally. If you start to feel your paintbrush drag, you definitely want to have a water bottle with a misting ability to it. You can either go buy one at your local art store, or I recycle bottles that are misting type bottles and use them for water in my studio. So you can see how that purple, I mean, and it's not going to be this predominant when the piece is finished, but that purple just kind of brings interest into that detail. And here is the dark lake, which is probably my favorite blue so far that I've discovered through Paint Couture. It's such a pretty soft blue, and it just glides on like butter. So in blending, you want to push and pull the paint. And like I'm doing here, I'm doing cross hatching, I'm doing some circular motion. I am just working the paint until I get the blend that I'm looking for. And now I'm putting it upright so I can do that top drawer. And you guys, I apologize. I did that top drawer. I did a little raised stencil. I used some texture medium from Paint Couture and a stencil that I had, and I just wanted to do a raised stencil on there. So, and I forgot to get it on camera, so my apologies. But here I am, I'm continuing to work that blend out a little bit. It's not going to be a piece that is super important to make sure that the blend is perfect because of the things that I'm going to be doing to this piece in a little bit, but I want to make sure that the blend is cohesive. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. So now I'm going to bring in some Tuscan Sun, which is a really happy yellow, and I love yellow and blue together. And I'm just working that into the center of this piece. You kind of want to simulate, when you're doing furniture artistry, you want to simulate light and dark and shadows and recesses and all that kind of good stuff. And so this sunny yellow is going to make that bowed front of this piece kind of pop out a little bit more. And again, this isn't going to be extremely noticeable when the piece is done because of what I plan on doing, but I'm just blending that in. And again, I'm using a chippy brush. I'm using 3 different brushes here, guys. I'm using the chippy brush with the deep sea. I'm using a chippy brush with the dark lake, and then I'm using a chippy brush with the yellow. And I also have the Paint Couture brush, which if you haven't tried one of those, boy, you need to get one because they're just so great. They hold the perfect amount of paint and they're just beautiful. So I'm using that brush here for the eggplant to go over that to create sort of an orangey, pinky yellow color. Again, just kind of working that into the center of this blend. And you just keep working it until you're happy with it. Again, this piece, it's not super important that I have the perfect blend on this piece because it's going to be sort of masked with some other techniques I'm doing in a minute. But to blend a piece, it's super easy to just keep working at it until you're happy with it. Take a step back if you need to and see where you might be missing something, or you might need to add a little dark or a little light, and go for it. Adding a little more of the Tuscan Sun here just to get that blend the way I want it. And when you feel it's right, it's done. So I'm sort of using a dry brush technique here to go over those detailed areas and also to kind of drag out the blend a little bit better. And then I'm adding a little more of the eggplant in there just to kind of pull that back out because I don't want to hide it. And sometimes you can overwork the paint and hide some of the things you've done. So then you need to go back and layer some more, which all just adds more interest to your piece when you're done. I mean, it really does. The more layers you lay down, and I'm not using a huge amount of paint. There's hardly any paint on my brush here, you guys. You can make your paint go a really long way if you need to, just by simply using it sparingly. The Paint Couture paints are so well pigmented that a little goes a long way. Working on the side of this piece here, again, you can see that detail and how I'm pulling that eggplant purple into it to give a little more interest and dimension to it. And just continually working at it. Now you can see I've got that blend pretty much where I want it. I'm working on that top drawer up there, and I'm sorry you can't really see it because I didn't record this in the right format, unfortunately. And then I'm taking some of that eggplant color and sort of going along the edge to give some highlight to the edges too, to tie that color from below up on top. It just ties it all together. So now I'm going to turn the piece to the side so you can see how I finish that, because that's probably one of the most common questions I get. So I'm starting off basically exactly the same as I did on the front, pulling in the dark sea on the outside edges and getting the whole frame built up around my blend. And that's kind of how you want to look at it as a frame. You want your outside area typically to be darker, but if you want it to be lighter, you can do that too, and then go darker towards the center. I guess it's entirely up to you as the artist. But spritzing with a little bit of water, because when you're painting over another paint, your paintbrush will drag a little bit more. And then I'm going to add in the deep lake color. And that deep lake color is just going to go smack dab in the middle there in the center of that quote unquote frame. And I'm going to do the same type of blend as I did on the front, where you're just working back and forth, kind of cross-hatching up and down. You're pulling the dark into the light and the light into the dark. And then I'm also pulling in that eggplant on the side and down on the feet and along the top edge like I did along the front to make sure that it's all cohesive looking. And then I'm going to pull in some of that eggplant again from the bottom up, because I want it to have the illusion of a shadow down there with light hitting the top corner by pulling that Tuscan sun in from the top left. And then blending it all in the same darn way, just using your brush and working the paints gently together, spritzing if you need to, and just working that blend until you get there. So now we're pretty much done with the primary paint on this piece, and we're going to move on to the next step. So I start off by laying the piece on its back, and I grabbed that Harlequin stencil and that transfer because it gave me a really cool French country vibe, which is what I'm looking for. And I've grabbed my Peony color by Paint Couture along with my eggplant, and I'm just mixing a little bit of both colors together so that I have a softer pinky eggplant color for this stencil for the front of this piece. And I want to make sure that I hold the stencil down with one hand while I dab and stipple the paint onto this, over this stencil onto the furniture. And I'm doing it very sporadically, intentionally. I don't want full coverage. I don't want it heavy. I want it to be aged in appearance and kind of faded in spots, so that it's not like super pronounced. So you'll see how that comes out in just a second. And I just love the stencil. I mean, it works so great. But you can see how it's real sporadic, and not every square or every diamond has full paint coverage. I did get a little heavy-handed with the paint on my stencil brush because I couldn't offload it well holding the stencil with one hand. So I just spritzed a little vinegar water on a rag and wiped it back, and that got rid of that excess paint. So I'm going to continue stenciling the whole front of this, the drawers, and then we'll be ready for the next step. And if your stencil shifts a little bit, I mean, honestly, you should probably tape it down, or you can even use spray adhesive. You want to use the Easy Tack spray adhesive if you do use spray adhesive. But I've found that you can get some residual tack spray on your piece if you use that stuff. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I use it when I have to on a piece, but on a piece like this where I'm laying it on its back, I really try to avoid that. So again, it's perfect. It's splotchy looking. It's not perfect. It's not uniform. Exactly how I wanted this stencil to appear. So I'm wiping it down a little bit, and then I'm grabbing some 220 grit sandpaper and just lightly going over it to even distress it and soften it up a little bit more. And once I wipe the sanding dust off, I'm going to put a top coat on it, and now it's time to add the stencil. So this stencil, I just lay on there. I make sure that I get it as centered as possible. Once you lay it down, it's down, guys. So you don't want to mess with it once you've got it down on there. So using my transfer tool, I'm just going to apply pressure to the entire piece, get the transfer adhered to the front of this piece, and if you can get an air bubble in there or something to kind of work the sheet away from the transfer itself, that makes it so much easier. Because once you see it go opaque, that's when you know that the transfer is laid down on the furniture and not going to lift with the sheet when you lift the sheet up. So I just continue to rub the transfer onto the front of this piece until I get it completely on and secure. So now that that part is done, I rub over it with my hand to make sure it's laid down and securely on there. And then I use a razor blade to cut between the drawers so that it doesn't tear. Again, I'm going to rub over it just a little bit just to make sure that it's down securely. And then I use a sanding sponge or a abrasive pad just to kind of get all the loose bits and ends off and to kind of distress it a little bit. But you can see that hint of the Tuscan sun and the eggplant beneath those roosters and chicken, and I love it. So next I'm going to be grabbing my Paint Couture clear glazing base along with the color Espresso and mixing those together to create a nice glaze to go over this. And I'm going to go over pretty much the entire piece with this glaze. So I mix a ratio of about 1 part paint to 2 parts glaze. And you don't need a whole lot because it goes a long way, so maybe a 1/4 cup of glaze at the most. So I'm applying a glaze to the outside edges and the bottom and working it into all of those little carved wood sections. And again, you guys, I apologize. I did not have my camera set at the right ratio. But you'll be able to see it all here pretty soon. So once I get that paint into those carved areas, I'm going to take a fiber cloth and just wipe it back. I want to be gentle with the wiping back because I don't want to wipe it out of the recessed areas. I just want to wipe the surface. So you can see I'm not rubbing it hard. I'm just taking a swipe straight down. And it just pulls out the details a little bit more. Everything you do just adds more to the detail. Now I'm going to go over the entire front of the piece. The stencil, the rooster, the chicken, the bees. I'm going to go over all of it because I want it to look aged. It's a little too white and stark for me because I want this to look like an old French piece, an old country French piece. So I'm just going to age it out with this glaze a bit. Again, going over all of it. There I am removing a hair out of there. And making sure that I get it pretty good coverage because I want to make sure that that glaze kind of picks up everywhere. And you want to let it sit for a second or two, but not too long because you don't want it to dry, and then you want to wipe it back. And you can see how it's just given it the slightest edge of age to it without making it look dirty. It just looks older. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve here. And once you apply the glaze, you really don't need to put another top coat on over that. I often do, but the glaze in itself will act as a top coat for you. So once I have that glaze applied to the piece, I go in and I do some detail work, and I'll share how I do the detail work at another time, but I let the glaze cure and then I add some pigment powders, and the pigment powders would be a video in itself, so I didn't want to show those too intently here. But I'll show you some finished pictures of this piece now that it's all done, and hopefully you love it. Hopefully you learned a thing or two, or you at least enjoyed watching the video, and I appreciate you being here, so thanks for joining me. Again, thank you for joining me. This is Janet Perez with the Painted Saguaro, and I appreciate you joining me here on the Paint Couture channel. See you next time.